Very good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
Very good morning, sir.
Well, we begin with externalities and public goods. We have already seen what are externalities. We will go further into details today. To begin with, externalities has to be understood with an example. Let us say there is a steel factory which has been project has been planned and all the costs and all the infrastructure required have been calculated and the factory is set up. Now the factory, once it is operational, releases wastage and effluents into a nearby river. Now in that river, there are fishes and there is a group of fishermen who were living out of fishing from that river. Now their livelihood is gone because of the release of effluents. The river has become polluted, resulting in the death of the fishes. It's not possible for the fishes to survive, and that results in the fishermen losing their livelihood. So there is a clear-cut loss. So obviously these people approach the steel plant and they tell them that they have taken away their livelihood. Now, if the factory has got a few options, stop releasing the effluents into the river, treat it and then release it, or to internalize this externality by employing the fishermen into the factory. So when they do any of these, like if they stop, then also it is internalization because that will be a cost. Probably they will have to travel, put the waste in a truck and throw it in a dump far away. So there will be an additional cost involved. If they take another alternative and say treat the effluents before they are released to the river, that will also mean an installation of a machine at a cost. If the third option is exercise, people are employed, then also there will be a cost. Obviously, what the company will do is they will exercise that option which is the cheapest. And that cheapest option we call internalization. So you must understand what is internalization also. Obviously, externalities can be internalized. So externality is the effect of a decision on a third party, not considered by the parties involved in the decision and its transaction. The effect on the third party could be negative or positive. Externalities are not captured by the market, and so the externality is not transacted in the market. Thus, this is a situation of missing market. So if we look at the market point of view, externalities are not there in the market. Obviously, these are caused by the acts of individuals or institutions. For example, music club in students' hostels, they are playing loud music, disturbing the peace which should have prevailed in the night. When the externalities are generated, we ought to own the property. So who is the owner of the property? For example, music club, who should own the property? In the factory example, who should own the clean air if they are releasing smoke? If in case of river, who is owning the river? So externalities are effects of decision not captured in any transaction. It could be a negative effect, such as pollution, or it could be a positive effect, such as education resulting in development. If these externalities are not captured, there will be underestimation of benefit and or cost, and the challenge is to find ways of internalizing these externalities. Obviously, there will be two kinds of cost, private cost and social cost. Private cost will be to individuals, social cost would be to the group of the society. So when we take the example of effluents being released in the river, it is the individuals who are getting affected. So because the waste kills the fish, therefore we find that there is a effect on the individuals who are fishermen. In case of smoke, the whole society is affected because everybody will be breathing the air. Now, how do we respond to these externalities? Through internalization. And there are several ways of internalization. One is taxes. Now, there was an economist called E.A.C. Pigou, P-I-G-O-U. He is a very famous economist. And A.C. Pigou, he has proposed these taxes, therefore they are known as Pigouvian tax. Now, what is Pigouvian tax? Let us see. The tax is levied on each unit of the output equal to the marginal externality that is generated at each level of output. So it boils down to the tax which is imposed on the per unit output. So when Pigouvian tax is imposed, yeah.
Sir, please explain the Pigouvian tax again, the definition of Pigouvian tax.
I'm doing that. I'm in the process. Okay. I'm in the process. So Pigouvian tax is levied on each unit of output equal to the amount of marginal externality that is generated at each level of output. Now, there is a graph of the Pigouvian tax. The supplies shifts after tax to the left, equivalent to the amount of tax. And therefore, what will happen to the price? The price will increase. Demand will, of course, remain the same. So that increase in price is nothing but a cost to the company. And therefore, there will be an additional cost, which was probably not calculated earlier. That is why, in the first place, this is an externality. So what happens is that through the tax, the damage which is being done is being compensated. Now, what happens with this amount of money which is realized? So the damage done by each pollutant has to be assessed. This is, of course, not an easy task. And that is why this Pigouvian tax is not applicable in all cases, but in cases wherever they can be assessed, they are imposed. And then this money which is collected, that is used to neutralize the damage done by the externality. I will illustrate with an example. Say there is a bridge which has been made. Now on this bridge, when vehicles will move, it will damage the bridge. Not in one day, maybe in 10 years, 8 years, the bridge is damaged. Now, to what extent a vehicle will damage the bridge will depend on the weight and number of wheels and the size. So that is why when you cross a bridge, if you are crossing on a two-wheeler, sometimes they will not charge you anything or a very little 1 rupee or 2 rupee. But when you are traveling in a car, they will charge you slightly higher. If you are traveling in a public vehicle, they will charge you still more. If you are traveling in a lorry, still more. If you are traveling with a very heavy vehicle with 8 wheels, 10 wheels, the charges are still higher because the amount of damage that is being done by each on the bridge is more. So that is the concept of Pigouvian tax. According to the damage that you are doing, per unit the tax is levied. That is why for light vehicles, lesser tax, for heavy vehicles, more tax. Makes sense. And therefore, Pigouvian tax is a concept which is applicable and very common wherever product-wise you can tax. Unit-wise, for every time a lorry crosses, they will have to pay the toll. Every time you make a product, according to the number of products made, you pay the tax because you have damaged so much. That is the tax part of it. When we come to the regulation, each polluter is told to reduce the pollution by a certain amount through regulation. There would be issued, say, regulation, emission standards, this much only you can emit. If we look at this, we will find the example of automobiles. We have pollution control checks on automobiles. These are regulatory. You have got to have it checked and keep it under control. You cannot have a vehicle which produces too much of pollutants on the road. So the quantum of damage is controlled through imposing regulation and of course also through taxes. So the problem which comes from imposing taxes, because it is not possible to assess it all the time, is done through the regulation, because the regulation is above this per level of pollutants, you are not allowed to ply your automobile. So regulatory is through regulation controlling the externality. Now, sometimes it is not possible to control the effluent. A factory, whatever you do, would be producing effluents because the factory is like that. So what is to be done? The government fixes the level of pollution for the firm, and the firm decides that our country can take so much of pollution, and the firms can buy the effluent rights. So that much of pollution they will do. From the fee generated, the effluent fee generated, the government can set up processes of neutralizing that externality. Let us say if an effluent is released, the government will treat it before it is released to the river. Or if a smoke is coming out, they will treat the smoke before it is released to the atmosphere. So that is through effluent fee. Then we have the concept of transferable emission permit. This transferable emission permit was actually first conceived in the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Some of you may have heard of Kyoto Protocol. This is, of course, the countries came together and decided that globally some check must be there on emissions being emitted by certain countries which are doing too much of damage and therefore causing global warming and all other effects which causes huge loss to the globe. So they decided that there should be transferable emission permits because these factories have a problem also, and that they cannot stop polluting because of their nature. Therefore, a concept was developed of transferable emission permits and certain thing called carbon credits, because most of the pollutants are in the form of carbon. We know hydrocarbons is the fuel, and when it is burnt, it releases a lot of carbon which pollutes the atmosphere. So carbon credits was the term given to the transferable emission permit. So if you are damaging a certain level, an example of trading in pollution rights can be cited from the example, and that example is that there were around 28 large companies in the US which were emitting 700 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. And this exceeds the whole emission of a country like Britain. Now, the carbon dioxide which is generated is absorbed by trees. So if 1 lakh hectare of new forest can absorb 1 million ton of carbon per year. So an entity was formed, Carbon Ring Consortium, which included all these 30 companies, and an investment banker, NM Rothschild, and of course the E3 International. They attracted the investors, and these investors brought out carbon credits in India and distributed it in a pro rata basis to each company, and here to each of the forest which is being developed. So additional 1 lakh hectares of forest were made, and therefore their rights to emit carbon dioxide continues because they have paid for developing 1 lakh hectare of forest. This is, of course, something which happened on 25th of October 2000. And India was the beneficiary. However, we know that the US went back on its word, and pollutions are still going on, but the controls are not happening. Therefore, the environmental law and all other effects are being made naturally to control the pollution. Recycling, of course, is something which is very, very important. And it's a good option in context of waste disposal, that you don't have the waste because you are recycling it to generate electricity, to a lot of breweries which make alcohol. I know, for example, that they take the effluents and generate electricity to run their own factory and surrounding areas. So the government is also giving incentives for recycling. Anybody who is doing recycling, disposing glass containers, the government gives incentives. Products which are recycled products, the taxes are less. And there is a government has issued a symbol which can go onto the recycle, the 3 arrows in a triangle. And they are imposed on the product and they can be checked anytime that these are recycled products. If you buy, say, drink glass colas, if you buy it, the shopkeeper will usually take a deposit. And when you return the glass bottle of cola, they will return you the deposit. So that's an incentive to the customer so that they don't throw it, they don't pollute the atmosphere, they return it back, and these bottles are recycled, they are filled with again, and they again come into the market. So that is another example of recycling. Now let us look at the market response to externalities. Now, obviously, the market response to externalities comes in the way of mergers. Now, we have seen the example of fishermen. If the steel company, owns the fishing activities, or if the fishing industry owns the chemical manufacturing firm, then what happens? These two are merged together. Then internalization will occur. So obviously then the chemical manufacturing unit would be concerned about the damage to the fishing activity because their profit will stop, and therefore they will start reducing the pollution or taking steps to increase profit of the fishing activity. So merger is one way of handling such situations. And when the entities and the firms and the government, if they are too many entities, of course, mergers cannot happen, but if there's one or two involved, they can easily be merged and it can be a very effective solution. Social conventions is another one. If social conventions are used to dissuade individuals from resorting to actions that generate negative exam, for example, we have had the hello. Yeah, so we are back. I'm sorry for that display and disturbance. So when we talk of social conventions, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is a good example. For example, even the playing loud music in the night is now discouraged. After 10, even wedding parties cannot play music. That is a social convention now, which has come about with the help of the government. Just like the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan also has come out with the help of the government. They have decided to throw your individual action is there. They will throw their waste to the right place. Therefore, they will lead to reducing the externality. Similarly, they will not play music, loud music after 10. Even Diwali and all, they are used as an exception, but the very next day the regulations come into effect. Now we move on to Coase's theorem. Coase's theorem is very simple. As long as ownership rights are assigned to one party, the bargaining will result in socially efficient solution. So it is about property rights to at least one party, because if the party has a property right, they will bargain. They will not leave it for the things to take care of themselves, and they will bring out an effective solution. This probably is not clear right now. I will give you an example and then it will become clear. As long as ownership rights are assigned to any one party, bargaining will result in socially efficient solution. How? Now let us look at this table. Now this table is having on one end the farmer. This is not a game theory, so please don't confuse it with game theory. We are trying to illustrate the farmer and the railroad, which is nothing but the railways. In the US, the railways is called the railroad. So the railways has got three options. Number of trains that it can help to ply. 0, 1 train, 2 trains. The farmer, on the other hand, has got 3 options. He may not cultivate any land. He may cultivate 10 acres of land, and he may cultivate 20 acres of land. Obviously, if nobody is running any train or if there is no cultivation, 0-0 will be the result. But if a farmer cultivates 10 acres of land, he is earning 1,500 rupees. If he is applying 20 acres, he is earning 1,600. If 1 train is being run, the railroad is earning 1,000. If the second train is run, it is getting 1,500. So there's an increase of 500 by increasing 1 train. The farmer, on the other hand, reduces from 1,500 to 900 if there is 10 acres of land. From the first to the second, another 600 loss is there. So this is the situation. Now, in this situation, what can happen if the farmer has the right to land? If he's owning the land, what will he do? So for every train which is running, a damaged is of 600 is happening for 10 acres. If the railroad increases from 1 to 2 train, the profit is increased by 500. Now what the farmer can do, since it is losing 600, it can save $99 by paying a bribe of 501. Don't increase the train. What profit you would have earned by running the train, I'm giving it to you. So by not increasing the train, railroad is earning more profit than it would have done by running the train. And the farmer is also earning more. So farmer payment, of course, at any time should not be more than the marginal damage. If damage was 600, he can easily pay 501. Therefore, if they bargain, because the farmer can bargain with the railroad, because he is owning the land, he can cultivate 10 acres of land and the railroad would be running 1 train and both would be having greater profit than they would have done otherwise. Thus, property rights lead to bargaining, establishing the Coase's theorem that bargaining leads to socially efficient solutions. That is the Coase's theorem. That is where we come back to with the help of the example. Is the example clear or do you want it to be repeated? Please let me know, because this is important and this is a question which can come. What is Coase's theorem? Illustrate with an example.
Sir, please can you repeat this once again? I didn't get the reduction. How did it get start reducing?
Okay. Now, he has not understood how reduction is taking place. Actually, when a train is being run, understand this.
Yes, sir.
When a train is being run on a rail track, there is some portion of the farm which is adjacent to the rail track. And when the train is plying, it will damage that crop. And that damage is being calculated Sometimes
So now
these, now you understood. So that is the
yes.
damage. So that is the damage which is being going on. That damage is calculated in terms of US dollars. I remember once I was in a train, and of course the train is not supposed to stop in between it. They are supposed to keep flying from one station to another. But sometimes they stop due to lack of signal, and the train stopped. And beside the train tracks was a farm which had probably a gram, and the crop was almost right, not 100% right, but green gram people love and eat. And the train, lot of people went down. Poor farmer, he must have lost his half his crop. They plucked out the plants, they came back into the train. They, of course, got it free of cost. But that is a damage which resulted from the rails being plied alongside the farmland. So a lot of such, obviously, the effluents which is released by the train, the smoke and all, they will retard the growth of the plants. So all that will cause loss of to the farmer. And that loss is taken in terms of the 600 US dollar that has been calculated. That this will be the damage caused by one train, two train, and so on. Clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, now it is clear. Thank you, sir.
Fine, fine. Anybody else to whom this is not clear? You can ask now, otherwise we'll move on. So we move on now to public goods. Excuse me. What are public goods? Now there has to be two features for any goods or product to be public goods. The first is it has to be non-rival. Now, what is the meaning of non-rival? This simply means that consumption of a product by one individual does not reduce the ability of another individual to consume it. That is, if you are like, if we take a non-public goods, for example, if there is a bag of mangoes and I eat those mangoes, obviously you are deprived of eating the mangoes because I have eaten it. You cannot eat it again. But if there is a good which I have consumed, but it does not prevent you from consuming it, then that is known as public goods. There can be a lot of examples for this. Somebody is trying to say something, it is not clear. Please try to, you can type out what you want to say because it is not clear to me. Can you type your question in the chat?
So maybe as
your sound is not coming properly, therefore I request you to put it in the chat whatever question you want to ask, then I will answer. There is a chat option just beside the stop. There is a participant, and beside the participant there is a chat option. You can type it and the question will come to me because your sound is not coming clear. It is disturbing me and the class. So if you have a question, please ask there. Otherwise, of course, I've muted you. If a question comes, I will answer it. It has not yet come, so I move on. Maybe by mistake somebody's audio was switched on. We can assume that and move ahead. So when we talk of public goods, these are non-rival goods. Consumption by some individuals does not prevent the quantity available for others to be reduced. That is a non-rival. If we take example of defense service, for example, if the armed forces are utilized in Kashmir, it does not prevent Kerala from using them. There is no reduction for Kerala. Why? Because the marginal cost of providing the service to an additional customer is zero. However, that is not true for private goods where there is rival in consumption. And the purchase of shoes, for example, reduces the availability of shoes for others because you have already purchased it. That shoe, at least I'm not going to get. There are, of course, many other examples which will come to your mind also. Another feature of this public goods is that they are non-excludable. That is, you cannot prevent a person from consuming such goods and services. For example, if the army is out in Kashmir, then they don't work for individuals. They work for the whole society. And you cannot prevent, say, even if you are a militant hiding in a village, you will be safeguarded by these army people. If you are a militant and if you are drowning, they will not prevent that. No, nothing will prevent them from saving you, unless, of course, they discover your true nature. So it is non-excludable. A good example of this would be, say, lighthouse. A lighthouse is there. It is giving warning signals to the ship not to come. Some ships have paid for the installation of the lighthouse. Some people have not paid. But you cannot prevent those people who have not paid from utilizing the service of the lighthouse. They will also see the light and they will not go near the shore because there will be a danger of the ship being grounded and ruined and sink. So that is why the lighthouse is there. So in such a case, again, the prices become meaningless because you cannot prevent another person from utilizing it. Another example is a recreation park. You enter into the park and of course you can use it. Sea also is an example of non-exclusive, but coral harvesting can be a rival activity because there will be no fishing there. So public goods are those goods which have both non-rival and non-excludable. Another example could be the road. Another example could be the bridge. All these which are constructed, parks, museums, they all come under public goods. So non-rival in consumption means the consumption of goods by some will not reduce the availability to others. And non-exclusion means that it will not be possible to exclude potential customers from consuming the goods in question. These two characteristics define what are public goods. Obviously, they cannot be left to the market mechanism because it will not be able to function. Now we move on to efficient provision of public goods. Of course, for private goods, the demand and the supply will be taken care of, the marginal cost, benefits, all those will work, but not so in case of public goods. So the efficiency
So,
Yeah,
could you please explain non-excludable once more? I failed to catch that.
non-excludable. Yeah, I can do that. No problem.
Thank you.
Non-excludable simply means that you cannot exclude potential customers from using it. For example, the government makes a very good road from the college to that city. Can you prevent anybody from using the road? The answer is no. If anybody has got a vehicle or even on foot, they can use the road. So when you have a product where you cannot prevent people from using it, we call it non-excludable. The example of lighthouse was also similar. The lighthouse is on, burning, everybody can see the light. So, example of, say, street lights is another. If street light is there, it cannot be that only the owner of the house will see in that street light. Even others who are traveling on the road will use that. You cannot prevent anybody from using it. Therefore, it becomes non-excludable. Not possible for the manufacturer to allow it only to those who pay for it. Even those who do not pay for it use it. Therefore, these things are called public goods, and generally the government is the one who is involved in making the public goods. All public goods are created by the government through taxpayers' money, and because they know that this will be used by everyone. And that is why these are called public goods. And of course, since they are not paying any price, they do not reveal the true value of the goods or service that they are consuming also. Obviously, they are getting some value. There is no doubt about it. If a good road is made, the travel time decreases, the fuel efficiency goes up. So, obviously, but there is no need to reveal all these to the government. They can be. And therefore, if somebody tries to create a market out of such a activity, it will fail, it will collapse. The market will not survive because people will not pay. Why? Because the true valuation cannot be done, and you cannot exclude anybody from utilizing the service. So why should I pay when others are not paying? That is the reason for public goods. The markets fail, and therefore the government has to intervene, and they are the ones who create the market. Is this clear? Your non-excludable?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Fine. So we now move on to public goods and market failure. So why does the market fail? Because we cannot fix the price. The seller will realize the price. Let us take the situation where it is decided that the municipal authorities will launch a litter-free campaign. To keep the neighborhood clean, it fixes a fee of 20 per household to keep the neighborhood. It will be able to successfully realize the amount in a cost-efficient manner only if the household that did not pay are prevented from enjoying the benefit of clean surrounding. But that is not possible. If whether you pay or not pay, you will be getting the benefit of a clean surrounding. As a result, the beneficiary is encouraged to override the fee, not to pay the fee. Because I will not pay the fee, but I will use that clean environmental. So if a good is non-rival but excludable, A public park is non-rival in nature, but the marginal cost of providing the benefit of the park to the additional customer is zero. It can, however, be made excludable by selling entry tickets. If there is an entry ticket, then it becomes excludable. So if the seller has the access to the demand curves of the individual, they can also discriminate. And therefore, families can have a cheaper ticket than others. So it is possible to market such public goods subject to the availability of data. And of course, when we look at this can be converted into a matrix. That matrix will be whether it is non-rival, non-excludable, or non-rival is there, but it is possible to exclude, or if it is neither non-rival, non-excludable, it becomes a private goods, or if it is possible that it is non-rival, but it is non-excludable. So rivalry is there, but it is non-excludable. These are the 4 options that can be generated out of this matrix. Okay. And obviously, the public goods would be where both are there. Certain other types of goods would be where, say, it is possible to exclude. The example of park is there, where it is non-excludable, but there is rivalry. There are examples for that also, like say, rivalry can exist. Only a limited number of people can cross a bridge for a given time, but you cannot prevent anybody from crossing the bridge. So it is non-excludable, but rivalry is there. Who comes first and who goes? If there is a queue on the road, if there is a huge rush on the road, if there's a jam, then we get a case of rivalry, but non-excludable. Because you cannot prevent people from utilizing the road, but there is a rivalry as to who will cross first. These are the 4 quadrants of the matrix. So government alone is responsible for provision of public goods normally. However, 3 Ps have come in recently, and now there is a public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships allows private people to take part in providing public goods. So you now see bridges being constructed under the PPP model, over bridges being constructed, roads being constructed under the PPP model. So the scope of public-private partnership is any projects has 4 principal modules in the stage: definition and design, financing, construction of assets, and actual operations. So obviously, the government now has started the PPP in almost all the departments. For example, if a metro is being constructed, we find that even for designing, the private people are being encouraged to make a design and submit it to the government. The government, of course, takes the final decision. But if they are designing, then they become part of the design team. Financing is also done under PPP model, and they recover it by imposing toll tax and other ways. And of course, in construction also, the construction is contracted out. The government does not do the construction, but it contracts out. And this contracting out can be of two types: ex ante competition, where contracting out provides an avenue to introduce competition where there is none. And of course, high powered incentive. So there is a huge incentive so that they can innovate faster and provide lower cost. That is how contracting out can benefit in the construction of assets, and in actual operations and delivery also. A lot of time private owners are there to collect the toll taxes and provide the share to the government, and so on. Obviously, when it comes to private financing also, a lot of such private people can finance, provided they get a fair return, which can be assured by the government. And of course, when we look at the public-private partnership, we find now all the NGOs are such examples. Most NGOs express that the biggest obstacle is working with the government is the bureaucracy. And of course, if they get rid of that, then the model suggested where ownership is given to the more caring of the party. And since most NGOs are more caring ones, they get the benefit of that. And we know that the NGOs have partnered in programs with farmers, healthcare, and so on. In India also, a lot of anti-poverty provisions are taken care of by the help of the private people. So the central point to the PPP is sharing of decision-making authority. And the not so central point is sharing of rewards and risk. So when the contractual arrangement is made, these provisions are inculcated in that. A private party can provide assets, payloaders, and huge cranes and things like that. And the delivery of the service, which traditionally has been done by the public sector. And the central, so that is the way this private-public partnership come in. So those who take decisions will obviously be the ones who will be sharing the rewards and risks. So that brings us to the end of this chapter. Any questions are there, you can ask. We have, say, another 5 minutes if you have any questions, or we'll call it a day, because we will start the next chapter in the next class. Any questions?